Welcome. Thank you for joining the 2020 Lifesavers Conference first session via webinar, Fully Autonomous Vehicles, Reality or Hype. I'm Kathy Chase, President of Advocates for Highway and Auto Safety. For those of you who attended last year's conference, you may remember me as the MC who wore the big derby hat to kick things off in the plenary. Some housekeeping remarks. As this is a safety conference, the Planning Committee always reminds attendees to please note the emergency exits. Oh, guess we don't need to do that today, but you still might want to note your emergency exit in case I tell some more corny jokes. Before we begin today's session, I'd like to set the stage of how this is going to work. Each speaker will be given opening remarks for approximately 10 minutes. Following the final speaker, I will start posing questions and moderating what I'm sure will be an informative and thought-provoking discussion. There'll be an opportunity for attendees to ask questions by submitting them via the questions and answer box. If time permits, I will pose those questions to the speakers at the end. Before our speakers begin, I'd like to share some information about Advocates for Highway and Auto Safety and our position on autonomous vehicles. Advocates was founded 31 years ago. Our mission is to advance safer vehicles, safer drivers, passengers, and road users, and safer roads. This slide, which shows some of the major safety wins we have worked on with other partners, demonstrates that we have always been pro-proven safety technology. For example, the path to rear-view cameras as standard equipment on all new vehicles began as a bipartisan effort to overcome the tragedy of 50 children being run over and 2 dying each week. Initially, some said the technology would cost $250 per car, which some in the industry found to be cost prohibitive, even though DOT prices a life at $9.6 million. Also, when equipment becomes standard, meaning it's required in every new car, the cost goes way down. It also ensures that the safety technology is not just in high-end packages or luxury vehicles. To that point, just this week, Consumer Reports released a report that found an astounding upcharge of more than $16,000 for automatic emergency braking with pedestrian detection in the second most popular vehicle sold in the US. Critical vehicle safety improvements should be accessible to all. Since around 2012, there's been growing discussion about AVs, many predictions for their arrival, and their potential to make transformative change in transportation safety. Back in the early to mid-teen years, when many were bullish about the anticipated rapid development of self-driving technology, some predicted the imminent arrival of AVs, including Google co-founder Sergey Brin and Tesla CEO Elon Musk. However, driving is an incredibly complex task, and making the next big leaps in self-driving technology capability are more complicated than originally anticipated. Timelines have been pushed back and predictions tempered, as the reality of a fully autonomous vehicle remains a long-term goal rather than a present-day reality. Matthew Johnson Robertson compares previous timelines to a hype cycle, and Alex Webb is now looking to 2034 as the year that a very small number of level 4 vehicles may be on our roads. Unsurprisingly, the public is acutely aware of the mixed messaging, and coupled with the high-profile crashes that have occurred with vehicles equipped with self-driving features, consumer confidence in the technology has faltered, as evidenced by many public opinion polls. The information on this slide is from a poll that Advocates commissioned in January of this year and serves to illustrate the issue. It also shows a path forward. A majority of respondents affirmed that their concerns would be allayed if the vehicles were required to meet minimum safety standards. Additionally, advanced driver assistance systems, known as ADAS, is available now to reduce crashes. It may also serve as a dual purpose of getting consumers used to some of the foundational vehicle safety technologies of AVs and boost confidence in it if it works as expected. As you can see, the reduction in crashes are significant, 50% for AEB and 62% for rear AEB. If these technologies came in as standard equipment in all new vehicles after meeting a minimum performance standard, reductions in crashes, fatalities, and injuries could be substantial. Bills are pending in Congress which would accomplish this task, and we're working to make sure that they're enacted. I'd like to thank IIHS for this slide and their research that helps formulate our policy positions. We use this chart often, and it's well known that it's my favorite. In conclusion, I would also like to add that the National Transportation Safety Board has included increasing implementation of collision avoidance technologies in its most wanted list of transportation safety improvements since 2016. Most recently, I co-authored this opinion piece that ran in the Hill with Dr. Missy Cummings, Director of Humans and Autonomy Lab, Pratt School of Engineering, Duke University, and a known and sought after expert on AVs. It expresses our position about AVs, which is that we are not opposed to them or Congress proceeding with legislation, but proper safeguards, regulations, and oversight are needed to ensure the potential benefits are realized. Without further delay, I'd like to introduce our first presenter, Jessica Jamakian. Dr. Jamakian is the Vice President of Vehicle Research at the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety. She joined the Institute in 2009 and has conducted research on topics including vehicle automation, crash avoidance, and crash worthiness. She previously worked for Nissan North America and the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. Welcome, Jessica.
Thank you, Kathy, for the introduction. Let me as Kathy mentioned, I'm with the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety, which is an independent, nonprofit, scientific, and educational organization dedicated to reducing losses from motor vehicle crashes. I'd also like to mention our sister organization, the Highway Loss Data Institute. Both of these organizations are solely funded by auto insurers. And at IIHS and HILDI, we have a very diverse research portfolio that spans the vehicle, people, and environment countermeasures. And in our vehicle research, we spend a lot of time looking at technology and understanding how consumers interact with the technology, what their, how they accept it, and how they perceive the technology, and also what are effective technology countermeasures in preventing or mitigating crashes. So I want to start by talking a little bit, kind of laying the groundwork for this panel about technology and how it fits into automated vehicles. We know anybody who's bought a car in the last 5 years knows that technology there's been a huge upgrade in technology in vehicles, whether it's how you access your AC controls or your music, to safety related technologies like crash avoidance technologies. So when we talk about technology and the kind of the spectrum in the road to automation, I just want to speak a little bit about some of the terminology, because I know there's a lot of confusing information, particularly in the media and some marketing materials, to really help us understand what an automated vehicle is and what an automated vehicle isn't. So crash avoidance systems are available in vehicles today. They intervene when a crash is possible or even imminent. Some of them you may know as things like lane departure warning or blind spot monitoring or automatic emergency braking, which as Kathy mentioned, we know these systems are effective at reducing crashes. She pointed out automatic emergency braking is effective in reducing up to 50% of front to rear crashes. And we can buy these on vehicles today. You can go to the dealer and we know that these have a safety benefit. But we also, available on vehicles today, are driver assistance systems that don't intervene in the event of an imminent crash, but will actually provide continuous support in terms of speed control or steering assistance. Sometimes we hear words like adaptive cruise control or lane centering technology, and sometimes they're combined together. into packages that you might know. Some of the more commonly known ones are things like Tesla's Autopilot and GM's Super Cruise. But we know that for these systems to be operated safely, we know the driver needs to remain engaged and they need to take an active role in continuing to drive the vehicle. So some people might use self-driving to as a term referring to these driver assistance systems, but that's not the case. These are absolutely not autonomous vehicles, and they are not self-driving vehicles. We need the driver to remain engaged. But then we move over to highly automated vehicles, which are being tested and deployed all around the country. And they can take a couple different forms. They can be retrofitted passenger vehicles with an upgraded sensor suite. But those vehicles will meet all occupant protection standards that we're accustomed to in our regular passenger vehicles. Or they might be these minimally regulated low-speed shuttles like you see on the right here. These are not available to consumers today. These are owned and operated by companies, and they, as highly automated vehicles, they ultimately will not require a driver in their operational design domain. So in the area that they're designed to operate, they should not require a driver. So again, thinking about crash avoidance systems intervene in the event of a crash. Driver assistance systems support the driver, but the driver must remain engaged. But when we're talking about highly automated vehicles, we're talking about vehicles that are owned and operated by companies. These are not ones that we can currently purchase. And the last point I want to leave you with is that data is really going to be key to understanding the safety benefit of these. So we need independent and objective research to really foster public confidence in automated driving. So we need to make sure we are collecting appropriate data at the time of testing and deployment, and that data needs to be shared with the government and independent and objective researchers. So thank you, and I look forward to answering your questions during the panel.
Thank you very much, Jessica, for that excellent presentation. I'd now like to turn to Ensar Becek. Ensar is a senior project manager and crash investigator at the National Transportation Safety Board in the Office of Highway Safety. Dr. Becek joined NTSB in 2013 and has helped shape surface transportation safety on a variety of topics. Notably, he has served as the automated vehicle investigator for fatal crashes involving vehicles with partial automation. Welcome, Ensar.
Thank you, Kathy, for inviting me and everyone for watching the webinar today. And let me just share my screen, which hopefully should be on now. So being with the NTSB, I intend to give you a crash investigation perspective regarding automation on the roads today. And I want to thank Jessica for an excellent overview that helped set me up. So first things first, the NTSB is an independent federal agency that investigates crashes in all modes of transportation, including highway. In our role, we determine the probable cause of a crash, issue recommendations to reduce the likelihood of similar crashes occurring in the future, and then follow up on the implementation of those recommendations. Today, I want to give you a snippet of some of the AV-related crashes we have investigated, but do so within the context of the promise of automated vehicles and discuss the significant issues we see arising or repeating. So Jessica and both Kathy mentioned, much of the public perception about anything vehicle automation related is driven by the language that we use. Multitude of acronyms, which are continuously being redefined, SE levels of automation, which today some view as somewhat outdated. So for public, this language of automation is a source of confusion. But then we also have marketing language, which ostensibly makes things simple, but is telling the public to expect to be piloted autonomously or professionally. But permeating throughout this discussion of automated vehicles and into the public sphere is the grand promise, and that is the safety promise at least, The automated vehicles, however that is defined, would reduce the number of crashes and be safer than a human driver. But the question that we should always ask then is which human driver? The one that is impaired, fatigued, not paying attention? Well, we certainly would hope that any automated systems would be better than such terrible drivers. But how about an attentive, experienced, and a healthy driver? Because such driver represents a very high ceiling. So bearing in mind this high standard of an expert and attentive human driver and the public perception of automated vehicles and assistance systems, I thought that would be useful to compare the two. Considering the title of this Lifesavers webinar, I will go through several crashes very quickly that NTSB has investigated that involved production vehicles being operated in partial automation mode. So I am focusing on the crashes with production level vehicles with highest level of automation that the general public can purchase. I will describe these investigations while focusing on the basic components of safe driving that were affected, both for the automated system, so the machine, and for the human operator. Those safe driving components being perception, attention, and decision-making. So you are well familiar with the first fatal crash in Williston, Florida. A truck-tractor combination vehicle was traveling on a US highway and was making a left turn in front of the Tesla, which at the time was operated in a partial automation mode. Its autopilot was activated. As the truck was completing its turn, the Tesla struck and passed underneath the trailer. The driver of the Tesla died. In regards to the basic components of safe driving, the partial automation had a problem with perception. The system did not detect the truck, but the driver also did not react in any way. He was inattentive. Since the driver had about 10 seconds to notice the turning combination vehicle and initiate an evasive action, we could state that an attentive human driver would likely have avoided this crash. The next fatal crash involving Tesla operating in partial automation mode, at least in the US, occurred in Mountain View, California on US Highway 101. A 2017 Tesla Model X, that is the SUV, was traveling at highway speeds and for the most part was following a vehicle ahead of it. Less than 10 seconds before the crash, the Tesla began moving leftward and into a gore area, mistaking it for a travel lane. As the Tesla now moved fully into the gore, it no longer detected the lead vehicle. Since the system determined that the forward path is clear, it began accelerating the vehicle to the driver's set cruise speed. At the end of the gore was a non-functional attenuator and a concrete barrier. The Tesla struck the barrier and fire ensued. The driver of the Tesla died. In regards to the basic components of safe driving, partial automation system had a problem with perception, as it did not detect the concrete barrier or recognize that it was traveling in a non-travel lane. We could also question the system's decision-making as it was accelerating the vehicle towards the hazard. But also the driver did not react, not when the vehicle veered into the gore, nor when it accelerated toward the barrier. The driver was inattentive as he was playing a game on his phone. The crash occurred at daytime, so the visibility wouldn't have been an issue to an attentive driver, which can lead us to state that an attentive and experienced driver would likely have been able to avoid this crash as well. And in March of last year, another fatal crash occurred in Florida that is reminiscent of the Williston crash. In Delray Beach, a 2018 Tesla Model 3 was traveling on a US highway, and its driver had just engaged autopilot. By that time, a truck-tractor combination vehicle was rolling a stop from an access road and starting to make a left turn onto the highway. As the truck was completing its turn, the Tesla, at the speed of 69 miles per hour, struck and passed underneath the trailer. The driver of the Tesla died. Unlike the Williston crash, which occurred during daytime, Delray Beach crash occurred at dusk. But this Tesla was able to capture images from the forward camera. These images show the last 4 seconds before impact. However, Despite the truck being clearly visible, the system was not able to detect the truck. And as a result, it did not slow the vehicle or engage forward collision warning or automatic emergency braking. In regards to the basic components of safe driving, partial automation system had a problem with perception, as it did not detect the truck. Although the driver had engaged autopilot 10 seconds before impact, he became inattentive almost immediately after. Although the crash occurred at dusk, we can say again that an attentive and experienced driver would likely have been able to avoid the crash. So before I summarize the basic findings of these crashes and draw the most obvious conclusion about machine perception being hard, I want to make a comparison to the requirements for obtaining a driver's license. We are tested on driving skills and traffic knowledge, and we receive a very basic vision test. But our perception is never questioned, never tested. It is assumed because humans have excellent perception. In contrast, machine perception is hard. It is very hard. In fact, it is so hard that we haven't solved it yet. So one of the basic findings from these crashes is that partial automation systems have limitations. They may not detect a hazard on the vehicle's path, may not recognize an appropriate travel lane, and IHS has done excellent work showing these deficiencies, and I encourage you to ask Jessica those questions. But these are known limitations of these systems. We know that they are far from perfect, which is why a constant human engagement is required. But what we have also seen in these crashes is that drivers become inattentive. Tesla uses driver-applied steering wheel torque to infer driver engagement. But this method, or its implementation, was clearly ineffective in maintaining drivers' attention in these crashes. As a result of these investigations, NTSB made recommendations in several areas. But for the two areas that I discussed today, related to the perceptual limitations of the systems, we made recommendations to the manufacturers as well as to NHTSA to restrict their use to domain for which they are designed. So the goal is to limit the system's limitations. That is, they should be used in areas with fewer challenges. Related to attention and human limitations, we have made recommendations to manufacturers to develop a more effective method of monitoring driver engagement, such as head tracking or even eye tracking, with a full understanding that maintaining constant driver's engagement in this automation monitoring task is a big challenge. So many of the findings from these three crashes can be applied to future expectations of automation. And if I may make a shameless plug for a Lifesavers webinar next Tuesday, in which we will discuss testing of higher level automated systems. So in testing, we again encounter extreme challenges of machine perception, as well as the difficulty of monitoring automation, in addition to other challenges. And a safety-oriented future approach would be to temper expectations of automation, especially regarding the timeline, and rely on more proven driver assistance systems, specifically collision avoidance that Jessica mentioned. And that is all that I have for this initial segment. Thank you, Cassie.
Thank you so much, Ansar. Okay, good. We have Raj. Thank you, Raj. Our final speaker is Michael Replogle. Michael is an internationally recognized transportation expert who has served as Deputy Commissioner for Policy at the New York City Department of Transportation since 2015, where he guides overall agency strategy. Michael also founded and chaired the Partnership on Sustainable Low Carbon Transport, as well as the Institute for Transportation and Development Policy. Prior to his current position, he was the Transportation Director for the Environmental Defense Fund. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here this afternoon. New York City is the largest and densest city in the United States with 8.6 million people. And we maintain 6,000 miles of heavily traveled urban roadways, 13,000 traffic signals, nearly 800 bridges and tunnels, and have an agency of 5,500 employees. And traffic safety is our #1 priority as a transportation agency. And through our Vision Zero program, we've accomplished a lot, reducing road traffic deaths by 25% or so since 2013, while road traffic deaths have increased in the rest of the United States. We've done that through better street design and engineering, through safety education, through outreach, through effective automated and conventional enforcement. We see promise in highly automated vehicle technologies to help us further achieve our goal of getting to zero road traffic deaths in New York, but we need federal partnership in order to get there. And we're concerned that the approach that we've been seeing in the last several years is not moving us expeditiously in the direction that we need. We see an approach coming from the auto industry suggesting that our cities need to be made ready for automated vehicles. But we would argue, in fact, that automated vehicles need to be made ready for the cities that we have here in America. We need to pursue in America an approach more like that of many other wealthy, advanced economies like the European community, which is adopting incremental traffic safety standards for motor vehicles to help establish a strong foundation to move forward, as we've heard some previous speakers suggest, with technologies such as those required in the European Union's post-2022 motor vehicle standards. 15 traffic safety technologies will be required in all new motor vehicles sold in Europe, and these include automated braking, automated pedestrian and cyclist recognition systems, intelligent speed assistance programs. Intelligent speed assistance on its own has been estimated by the European Commission to have the potential to reduce 30% of all road crashes, 20% of road safety deaths, or road traffic deaths, and 8% of carbon dioxide emissions. We need to be getting progress from NHTSA to establish those kinds of standards for conventional vehicles and also integrating those as a foundation for highly automated vehicles. We need to ensure that the approaches and requirements of cities are included in the automated vehicle policy process. All too often, we've seen the voices of cities marginalized in that process. And I'm appreciative of the organizers of this session that we're here at the table discussing what it takes to make highly automated vehicles work in the complex traffic environment of cities. This means we need to assure that automated vehicles can comply with all state and local traffic laws. I think we see now in the approach being taken by industry an attitude that suggests that those drivers who program automated vehicles should have no restraint in programming those vehicles to violate state and local traffic laws, even where that will result in clear hazard to the traveling public. We need to ensure that motor vehicle safety standards, including those for automated vehicles, protect not just vehicle occupants, but also those vulnerable users who are using the traffic system outside of vehicles. That means we need to ensure that state and local authority to regulate the performance of highly automated vehicles needs to be retained in any laws that are passed in this area. We need to ensure that manufacturer safety evaluation reports are made mandatory, and that there are independent assessments made of those reports, and that there are enforcement standards to those motor vehicle safety standards, so that there can be adequate recalls, for example, if there's a new over-the-air update for an automated vehicle. For the first time with highly automated vehicles, we're in a situation where it's not just the steering wheel or the brake system that is being certified for safety as a piece of hardware, but it's a combined software and hardware system that is performing the functions of a driver. And indeed, state and local governments regulate the performance of drivers in the traffic system. And so there needs to be a partnership between state and local governments and the federal government to ensure that we're all working together to ensure that highly automated vehicles, as they're introduced into the traffic system, assure performance that will advance safety. We need cybersecurity standards that are specific to highly automated vehicles, so that these not only cover the equipment performance, but the ability of the automated driving system to detect objects and events and to respond to them, as we heard NSAR's previous presentation note, is often a failure point in existing early stage highly automated vehicle systems. This means we need vision tests to recognize pedestrians and bicycles with high accuracy, and checks to validate decision-making and maneuvering in complex traffic environments, such as the core of Manhattan. We need cybersecurity standards to ensure a layered security architecture to protect all entry points to the highly automated vehicle electronic system, with appropriate encryption standards and identity validation for vehicle to vehicle and vehicle to infrastructure communications, so that highly automated vehicles can't be turned into weapons or otherwise abused in the environment. And finally, we need to establish protocols to ensure that highly automated vehicle safety data is shared with state and local governments, so that we can indeed continue to play the important role that we have, working in partnership with other levels of government and with the private sector to try and advance a safer traffic system. So all of these things mean that we need to be developing new and more effective approaches to governance as we advance highly automated vehicle technologies. We don't need a hands-off approach. We don't need a laissez-faire approach. We need a good governance approach. And we hope to work in partnership with others, stakeholders across the public and private sector in coming years to help establish that foundation, so that we can move to Vision Zero and reduce road traffic deaths in our cities and across America and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. I'd now like to kick off the discussion aspect of this webinar by posing some questions to each panelist. All of the other panelists should feel free to jump in after the person to whom I've addressed the question is answered. And just a reminder to be cognizant when you have self-muted and not. So the first question is to Jessica. Jessica, let's get to the heart of the issue, saving lives. Of course, coming from me, that's where I'd go first. Do you think that fully AVs will really eliminate approximately 90% of crashes?
Let me make sure I unmute. Well, for sure, it's true that driver errors play a role in the vast majority of crashes, but there's no guarantee that automated vehicle technology is going to be better than drivers. We assume, although Ensar showed some in his presentation, that sometimes the technology that's currently on the road has issues with perception of the hazards, but we assume that eventually autonomous vehicles will be able to sense and perceive the hazards better than human drivers. And of course, there are the obvious benefits of not having impaired or distracted drivers, but that alone is not going to prevent the bulk of the crashes. We recently did a study where we looked at the different errors that are being made, and the types of perception and impairment errors that I just mentioned only accounted for about 1/3 of crashes, and 2/3 were other issues. So we need systems that are going to be things like better predictors of other road users' behavior, or better at judging the appropriate speed for the conditions, or act safer than we as drivers want to act in our current state. If we as drivers need to be okay with our automated vehicles who are adopting safer behaviors than we do, like making sure we're buckling up before we engage on a trip, making sure the vehicle is not speeding or going too fast for conditions, and making sure that any safety issues, like any issues with any of the sensors or any recalls, are addressed before starting the trip. So it really comes down to, there's no guarantee that they're going to be safer just because you remove the driver. We need to be smart about how we remove the driver and make sure that we're designing automated vehicles to address those other issues.
Thanks, Jessica. You actually answered a number of questions that some of the audience has sent in your one comprehensive answer there. So I'd like to turn it over to, if any of the other panelists would like to offer their input on that question.
Yeah, I guess I think that it will be many years before highly automated vehicles achieve significant safety benefits, more than better driver assistance systems can help us move incrementally. But I think any progress will be based on a safe systems approach, which has to recognize that each stakeholder in the traffic system has to bear responsibility for what they can do to help prevent crashes. I think we've seen a safe systems approach used effectively in commercial aviation to bring down the number of crashes there, but that's involved intensive reporting of all crashes as well as all near misses in the system. Right now, we have intense industry resistance to sharing data on the safety performance of automated or partially automated vehicles that are being used for testing in cities. And that's, I think, of great concern to us, that it does not correspond to helping us work as partners to advance that safe systems approach. I think NHTSA needs to play a leading role in ensuring the transfer of data, of assuring a data clearinghouse, so that we can ensure that before we introduce highly automated vehicles in large numbers to our traffic systems, that they're certified to be significantly safer than good drivers, and not just marginally safer on a test benchmark. Our citizens and road users should not be guinea pigs for the auto industry to test unproven products that could result in significant hazards to our communities. Nor should we allow large numbers of highly automated vehicles sort of loose on our roads to operate as ghost vehicles, causing congestion in our cities by operating empty to avoid having to stop and park. I think there are a lot of socioeconomic concerns about the impact of a highly automated fleet on the shape and form of our cities, and how we price and manage our road networks that need to be addressed in order to assure that this innovation is moving us towards a more sustainable mobility system.
Thanks, Michael.
This is Ansar.
Sorry.
I have just a very quick addition. Jessica and Michael have really said everything that's on my mind and TSP's mind. But to add that currently there are no self-driving vehicles, and we need to constantly keep telling that to the public, that highly automated vehicles do not exist yet. They are being tested. And when that will occur, actually, Cassie, you as a safety person, as we all are, I've heard this from a couple of developers from an industry, that perhaps a question that we shouldn't ask a question of when will we have a self-driving vehicle in 2 years, in 5, but if we will be able to solve a problem. I like that approach from a safety perspective. And from the NTSB's perspective, we have investigated the crash in Tempe involving Uber ATG vehicle. And our focus was on what we currently have, which is testing of these vehicles. And because much of the testing is being done on public roads, how can that be done safely? And clearly, we identified NHTSA that has to play a big role, but especially with any sort of certification, meaning that the vehicles go beyond testing, has to be approached from a federal level, from NHTSA, to give assurances to the public that the vehicles are safe, and then to what level are they safe? Are they safer than that very good, attentive, expert human driver? That's all I wanted to add.
I think that's an excellent addition, Ensar. There is kind of an assumption that when AVs are on the market, that they will be safer, and not necessarily if. So I think your point is very well taken, and it warrants taking a step back before we take a step forward. Raj, before I move on to the next question, did you have a comment on this one? Thank you. The next question is to Ensar. Does the emphasis on development of AVs neglect other safety technologies in development, such as connected vehicles technology? I know you talked about ADAS, but do you have a comment about connected vehicles technology specifically?
Oh boy, do we. Yes, and NTSB has submitted comments to the most recent FCC proposed ruling. And we are very, very concerned about that development. Connected vehicles technology has been in development for decades, for a very long time. And the potential benefits of them are enormous, especially when considering the challenges that vehicle-based automation systems have, which is in perception, which is identifying, detecting that there is an object present, and identifying it, what it is, and determining its intent. Those items are not a problem at all for connected vehicles. All it requires is a communication device that transmits information about identity of that object and its direction. So, and at the same time, the connected vehicles and vehicle-based automation are not competing technologies at all. They can coexist wonderfully and improve the safety of such vehicle by a great margin. So we are very concerned that with the development that FCC has taken, but also that DOT has not more forcefully taken a stronger step and required the technologies on all highway vehicles. So thanks, Kathy.
Sure. Does anyone else on the panel would they like to comment on that?
Yeah, I think that the way you originally posed the question was about whether we've neglected these other technologies like connected vehicles. And I think Ensar made this point that it's not really neglecting, it's not either or. We can do both. But I agree with Ensar that in the absence of a federal mandate, it's not happening. And so if anything, the automakers and the suppliers have been pushing this technology for years, but there's still some debate about what is the most cost-effective and most beneficial technology out there. And in absence of the government moving forward with the specifications or the requirements of how they need to operate and how they need to communicate together, and then mandating it so that we need to take that extra step, then I think we're going to keep languishing without the technology.
Yeah, and I would just add that, I think there's a very broad array of stakeholders across the transportation industry who have opposed the FCC's reallocation of the bandwidth that had been set aside some years ago for DSRC, the direct short range communications, for traffic safety spectrum. And by reallocating this to unlicensed unlicensed Wi-Fi operations under pressure from some in the telecommunications industry, there's a credible University of Michigan study that suggests that the expected delays in the adoption of vehicle-to-vehicle technology that will result from this reallocation of spectrum will result in between 7 million and 19 million more vehicle crashes in the United States in coming years, and up to 105,000 more lives lost on the highways. So I think this is really an unconscionable and unethical move by the Federal Communication Commission to, in a very short-sighted way, reallocate spectrum and undermine crucial safety technologies that could advance better traffic safety and safer automated vehicles in the long run.
Michael, I think that's an excellent point. I'm curious if Advocates for Highway and Auto Safety opposes that as well, of course. And I was curious about other organizations that are able to take a position on the issue, if you could speak to that move by the FCC.
Oh, yes. I mean, the FCC reallocation has drawn strong criticism from the U.S. Department of Transportation, from several automakers, from the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials, from a number of environmental groups, from the National Association of City Transportation Officials, and from many traffic safety organizations. And from all 50 state Department of Transportation heads in the United States. Getting 50 state DOT heads to agree on any one thing, that is an extraordinarily rare thing. So I think this is a really unusual situation, and I'm frankly shocked that it's happened without more public attention.
Oh, agreed. I wanted to bring in the other panelists to see if their organizations are able to take a position if they have. Ansar, you wanted to say something?
Yes, as I mentioned, NTSB has submitted comments to the FCC, and not for the first time. We have also submitted comments to DOT earlier when they delayed proposed mandate for DSRC on vehicles. And we do view DOT's this delay as, in a way, allowing DC to really take this unconscionable action, as Michael said, and whatever words that we use today do not adequately represent the actions or the anger, really the anger that much of the highway safety community does harbor. For example, GM Cadillacs, the high-level Cadillacs, have been connected for quite a few years, but they haven't had anyone to talk to. Toyota intended to connect its entire fleet, but due to the inaction and delay, has decided to scrap those plans. So from the industry perspective, there is a lot of goodwill towards adopting this technology.
Yes, Garaj, you have a comment on that, or should I move on? I'll ask the next question to Michael. There are not many driving environments more complex than New York City. What is needed to ensure that AVs can be safely tested in these types of environments?
Well, I think we need to take the incremental approach that places like Boston have taken of certifying technologies for lower complexity environments before allowing them to graduate to higher complexity environments. I think the most effective use of highly automated vehicles in New York are the kinds of tests that we've seen already to date. For example, in the Navy Yard in Brooklyn, where a low-speed transit shuttle is operating at 10 miles an hour in a largely pedestrian-oriented environment in which there is also motor vehicle traffic, and providing shuttle services to help people get around a campus to the metro subway stations that are at the edges of that campus. And I think from that, I think, again, also looking at strategies for effective data sharing with the city and with the state to ensure that as AV testing is done, that first test drivers are used in vehicles and monitoring their operations and sharing data to show that the vehicles are capable, and to share data on near misses. And after showing that these complex environments can be negotiated at lower speeds, looking at potentially other ways of operating. But again, I would suggest that the core of Manhattan is probably not the smartest place to start testing fully automated vehicles. Do your start in the lower complexity parts of New York City and then graduate.
Would any of the other panelists like to comment?
I think that was a great answer, Michael, and I agree. You don't jump into the deep end when you don't know how to swim. So it's important that you start and prove the effectiveness and the safety benefit in a less complex environment. When you talked about data sharing, I just want to put in another plug for making sure that we collect the appropriate data at the time the testing and deployment happens, and that data sharing extends beyond just the local and state government to independent researchers who can really evaluate the systems critically.
Any in mind, Jessica, that you were contemplating? Okay.
Of course, we'd love to get our hands on that data, but really, it's important that that's part of the process. Is
Agreed.
We need to make sure that we are not giving free rein to for-profit companies that are developing the technology. We need to have strong independent research of how these technologies are operating in real-world conditions, so that we and the public can be confident that there's going to be a safety improvement.
Yeah, and I think that's consistent with what New York would like to see, is strong collaboration with independent evaluators on making sure that all of this works, and we're not just doing very narrow parochial testing designed to prove a technology for profit alone, but proving that it's safe.
And sorry, I thought did you raise your hand there?
Yes, just to add, maybe to dovetail a little bit on what Rod said earlier about not waiting for federal government to take actions. NTSB investigated the crash in Arizona, and Florida and New York have given examples of the approaches that they are taking towards testing. But we know that many other states, and maybe the reason they have taken those approaches is because of the lack of really good guidance from federal government, primarily from NHTSA, as to how should the testing be conducted. But we know that many other states have minimal requirements or really no requirements at all for testing. And that is a really huge concern, huge concern for the public, because as I said, testing is being conducted on public roads, And we could argue that many or some of the traditional vehicle manufacturers that have AV program have a history of safety culture and they know how to conduct it well, but this is a brand new arena and there really isn't a good map on how to. Plus, in addition, we have a lot of brand new companies, maybe some tech companies, and also you could have Jack and Jill working out of their garage, buying some cheap sensors and building on their own system. And for many states, there is nothing to prevent them from testing on public roads, as long as they're using the base vehicle, which meets all the FMVSS.
Jessica, did you want to comment on that, or should I go to the next question?
No comment. I was just going to echo
Okay.
what I've already said.
Okay, sorry. I want to at this point say we have about 10 minutes left in the webinar, and I wanted to thank the audience for, we received numerous excellent questions, and I apologize that we won't get a chance to answer all of them, but I'd like to ask a timely question right now, as we're all still under the pandemic, and some in the industry have been saying that driverless, passengerless vehicles, which are delivering either medicine or food in a very limited basis and under 20 miles an hour, they're touting them, and kudos to them if they're working effectively. But I would contend it's a large leap from these limited testing vehicles to pushing for the wide deployment of autonomous vehicles. And I just, whatever panelists would like to comment on that, but my question is, what do you see the future of, the potential future of the safety benefits of autonomous vehicles? And what are your thoughts on what's happening now in terms of these limited testing vehicles? Why don't I start with Jessica, if you feel comfortable.
Sure. Well, your question about what do we see as the future benefits of autonomous vehicles. One thing I want to say, it's been echoed kind of throughout the panel, but we don't need autonomous vehicles to come in and make us safer. We have countermeasures now that we know work. We know that from not talking from a technology realm, but we know reducing speed limits, we know high visibility checkpoints, we know primary enforcement belt laws, all will help us be safer. And from a technology standpoint, we know that crash avoidance technologies are effective at reducing crashes. And so we have tools in our toolbox already. We just need the will to implement them and use them. But we do see that there are potential benefits from autonomous vehicles, but those benefits are far off, and they depend on how the technology progresses and how we can ensure that that they're designed in a way that will make the environment safer. As for what's happening now with touting these driverless things with, say, delivering medical supplies, I think it's a good on the marketing and to show that those are useful in this environment, but I would caution that we still need that oversight, and we need to understand what's happening, and we need to be collecting the data and sharing the data to be able to understand whether they will have a safety impact.
I think that's an excellent point, especially any data that is collected now will not be reflective of road conditions in the future. So that we want to make sure there's not an apples to oranges comparison in the future. Michael, looks like you wanted to comment on this.
Yeah, I think this, I think as the whole discussion to date in this session has shown, this technology isn't yet ready to take to scale. And so, small short range delivery bots are, a good public relations gimmick. And there's certainly no excuse for trying to tack legislation, for example, onto COVID recovery bills, which, some folks on Capitol Hill were rumored to be trying to do. So, I think, we need to really focus on real solutions to the problems of our society today. And these kinds of delivery bots are really just a distraction, I think, at the moment.
And Sarah, Raj, do you have a comment?
Sure.
Yes,
There's
yes.
very
Oh, I'm sorry. I should have
I-
called on you one at a time. My bad. And Sarah, go ahead.
Okay, thanks, Kathy. There's very little to add to that, especially with Jessica's more thorough response. There are a lot of countermeasures that we can utilize today from various driver assistance technologies, more specifically collision avoidance systems, to utilizing connected vehicles. And there are a number of questions from the attendees about, well, largely about their effectiveness, and then false alarms and issues pertaining to that. Collision avoidance systems, AEB specifically, and forward collision warning have improved a lot over the last 2 decades, and they are improving a lot. But what helps, and what we have maybe learned from Europe and Japan and Australia with their NCAPs, is that by making a requirement to reach a top safety rating, it forces the industry to improve those systems. And IHS clearly does a far better job than our own NCAP in not only in providing actual ratings by stating whether a manufacturer's AEB meets top safety rating. I can't remember the attributes that IHS uses, but the excellent, superb one, or adequate, or not at all. And we know from Euro NCAP, to reach a top safety rating overall, a vehicle has to have an excellent collision avoidance system, including pedestrian detection. So that would be one vehicle to improve the safety of already existing technologies. And regarding self-driving vehicles automation, it would be helpful to keep in mind or to make a distinction between safety and convenience, and to ensure that testing of self-driving vehicles is conducted as safely as possible. That is all. Thanks,
Thank
Kathy.
you, Ansar. Raj, you get the final comment before I wrap things up. Thank you. I'd just like to extend a big thank you to our panelists for their keen insights and for participating in this lively discussion. I've enjoyed today's discussion, and I hope all of you who tuned in did as well. I'd also like to thank Lifesavers for organizing the webinar series, and especially to Tara Gill of Advocate staff and Stephanie Shaw of the NTSB, who co-led this track, and Tara Casanova Powell, the program coordinator. All attendees will receive a follow-up email asking them to respond to an online 3-question evaluation. Please take a moment to complete the survey. Your feedback will assist us in meeting expectations and providing an even more satisfying, if that's possible, conference experience. We hope to see you next year in Long Beach. Be safe and stay well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.